Tailsman, which is a brand marketing agency that specializes in sports partnerships. So we work in F1, EPL, and across sports. And I have Derek here with me today, Derek is the former CMO of two of America's most iconic apparel brands, J.Crew and Madewell. Named one of Insider's top 25 most innovative CMOs of 23, Derek is a seasoned brand strategist and transformational executive at the intersection of fashion, commerce, and technology. He offers a track record of driving impactful brand strategies, enhancing consumer engagement, and refining customer-centric experiences. Known for seamlessly merging traditional marketing with innovative digital approaches to craft compelling brand narratives, he's renowned as an authentic leader who fosters team growth and trust. Welcome.
Wow. So
there
nice.
You go. I've been listening to a lot of Smartless recently, so I've perfected the intro. You gotta keep it going. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about that CMO role and kind of how the landscape has shifted, and it's obviously one of those most volatile roles in the C-suite. But
yeah. I mean, there's, if you're reading, marketing press, there's for sure a lot of content on the CMO role specifically. So I think I wanted to address that first. I think what's happening with the CMO role is really a reflection of what's happening in the landscape. So the CMO role, shortest tenure in the C-suite, on average. There's this kind of inconsistent contraction, expansion of scope happening across brands. All kinds of titles for CMOs these days. And to me, that's just a reflection like what's happening in the landscape at large. And I think the lesson, if you're going to take away one thing, is if you are a CMO or you're aspiring to be a CMO, to be successful, you just have to be ready to pivot and evolve constantly. That is to stay relevant, you have to do it constantly to stay on top of technology. It's just constant change. And if you think about what's happened just since 2020, yes, the pandemic and all these societal shifts and multiple theaters of global conflicts, climate change, all these things, but also all the things that have happened in marketing just in the last few years, death of the cookie, the rise of influencers, the cost of advertising, all this turmoil with social platforms. There's so much that's happened that's changed the way we operate. And I think that's really what's then reflecting, CEOs are like, what do I do with marketing?
Well, and you have to keep track of it. It changes daily now with TikTok and everything constantly changing. So how do you, if you have to have kind of a sense of the pulse on the pulse constantly, kind of what do you see going on now in the marketing landscape of branding and performance marketing and everything of the sort?
Yeah, I mean, I think the brand performance debate is an interesting one. There's all these people like, oh, performance is dead. It's back to brand marketing. And I think of it as a pendulum that it just swings back and forth. So when you're at my level, and a lot of what I had to do was allocate money. And so it's like, where am I putting my dollars, right? Am I putting it as brand? Am I putting it into performance? And at the end of the day, I really think of it as everything is brand and everything is performance. So you have to kind of start thinking about your brand programs in terms of measurement in a performance way. And you also have to think about the brand impact of all of your performance programs, right? And I think what's happening right now is we're in this interesting time where creativity has become back as the lead lever. And so even looking at your performance programs, creativity I would argue for most brands is probably your number one opportunity in your performance space, right? We've all done the optimization, set up your campaigns again, do all that ticking and tying and optimization, but really the big opportunities and needle movers are creative, right? So it's contextualization of your creative, testing, versioning, and just starting to create that world, because the customer doesn't see it as, oh, I saw a performance ad from this brand I love, or I went to this brand experience. They're just like, I saw this, I got an impression from the brand, right? And it has to all connect. And that's really the way to think about it.
Well, and I feel like it's kind of started as brand, it's gone back to performing, it's come back, and it keeps shifting. And I think part of that is COVID and everything that changed
for sure
in that landscape. And so my background is sports, and during COVID, I was at the Lakers, and going from a mass attended audience to not having anyone in the stands, you have to get creative of like, okay, how are we, getting these fans interested in the product and continuing to watch, but also selling merchandise. And it was a complete shift. But then I think we all felt it a few different times during COVID, but it felt like, okay, everything came back. Yeah. And I think now more than ever, it's kind of like it never happened. But how has that changed the marketing landscape too, as you look at brand performance?
I think the physical side has come back in full force, and I really think of it more just in the broader bucket of experience. And I think part of what's happened is because the cost of digital marketing has gotten so expensive, that's part of the reason why we're shifting dollars back to brand, right? Because it's like, well, this is just now, I've seen brands that have, in my space, which, we're selling whatever, $50 to $200 shirts. If customer acquisition costs are now $100, $150, when 5-10 years ago they were $15, the formula changed, right? So now you're looking at, stores are actually, I actually would argue stores have become the best acquisition vehicle. So especially at a local level, so stores driving brand awareness, even pop-ups, local experiences, being at these kind of platforms like F1, just getting in front of consumers in a way that is more entertainment-focused. And you think about the brands that still have traffic and lines out the doors, Nike, Apple, IKEA, Tiffany's, they're brands that have embraced entertainment or brand immersion as their point of view versus just transaction. And the brands that are just still focused on transaction have no lines out the door. And that extends to anything, right? So people want to they've been at home, but they want to be at the Taylor Swift concert. They want to go see Beyonce's film in the theaters. They're coming to F1 in droves and all the ancillary experiences surrounding it. So that's become the culture is entertainment and experience, and rooftop bars and private membership clubs. That's where people want to be today. So I think that's translated into...
How do you, when you're in that role, how do you delineate or choose between... E-commerce is obviously still a massive platform then, so how do you kind of mix those things together and have one working with it?
I think of it now as where it used to be kind of flipped as, for a retail business, the stores were where you did the bulk of your business, and e-com was like this great acquisition channel. Now I think the script has flipped, and I really do think stores and brand marketing are the better way to attract high-value customers, and then you capture them in those experiences into your membership programs or email, whatever you need, and migrate them, and e-commerce is now a retention channel. So once you know the brand and you love the brand, that's going to be the customer who responds to the marketing.
And then get them coming back to the store. How do you? And that's probably more of the marketing angle then.
Yes. Yes.
And so as brands have kind of changed, also it is this ever flowing kind of, it's more than just a brand, right? It's how have they changed if you're a brand that's much more than just that, right? It's a cultural shift. A lot of these things like Kith and all these other places, how have you seen that change in the marketing role as well?
Yeah, I think it's brands becoming platforms. So, I think it's happening to everyone, right? Like even individuals, especially when you look at Gen Z, they think of themselves as personal brands and they're managing it that way and they have that language intuitively. And brands have to think about the same way. And, there are massive global brand platforms like F1, right? So a brand like J.Crew is never going to be a global brand platform, but I think a brand can take lessons from how a platform operates and apply those to its brands, right? And probably the best example, and it's maybe the most unrealistic, is Barbie. So Barbie was a brand, right? This iconic legacy brand, and then last year became a platform because it had a world that invited people into it, and then people started telling their own stories. Brands started telling their own stories in context of Barbie. Everyone's, celebrating pink, but at the end of the day, it was actually about celebrating the values of Barbie, this idea of empowerment, And so I think that lesson of, how can you take your brand, create a world, which is what we do as marketers, but then invite people in and at the same time open it up to allow people to make it their own. So that might, on a small scale, that might look like creating a marketplace where other brands can sell. Maybe at a local level, you have a store where you're inviting local makers to sell product at your store and have an event. And so it almost becomes, your brand becomes a place where other brands or other people or community groups can operate. And it'll vary so much what that looks like, but I just think this idea of like open architecture, if you're borrowing from the tech world, how can you create open architecture in your brand that allows people to define the experience for themselves or define the experience for other brands and bring partners into that. So it's a little maybe esoteric, but I think brands as platforms is really interesting.
And it's cool how those can connect so many different generations and types of people also all in the same, right? Like I think there's this idea of kind of passion marketing where it is ageless, as much as we feel like, Gen Z and Gen X are so different, which obviously, and millennials, et cetera, which obviously we are, but in many ways we're also the same. And so I think it's interesting how something like a Barbie can kind of become this cult following of bringing so many different people who hold a lot of the same values into the same area. Talk about like, on social and in other areas, kind of how that brings communities together and where that's kind of moving from a social and platform perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I, as a marketer, totally don't buy into demographics. I'm like very anti-demographics. I am way more in the camp of personas and archetypes. I think like the Gen Z, millennial, boomer thing is just complete BS. To define a whole generation as this is how they think or this is how they behave, to me, I'm like, well, that's just because you're 20 years old, right? And when I was 20, I did a lot of those things, and I was flippant, and I was whatever. And then you grow up, and I think there's much more in common. People have more things in common when they're at a certain point in their life. Like, if you just had a baby for the first time, those women have a lot in common with each other, no matter where they are. Whatever their value, like they have something that's very, very common and very strong. And so I almost think of it too as like, if you think of archetypes, you have to think about the way people define themselves. So if someone is going up to you and introducing themselves as like, here are the 3 to 4 things you need to know about me, I have never heard anyone come up to me and say, I'm a millennial such and such, or I'm a boomer who blah, blah, blah. Like, no one talks like that. You would say, oh, I'm a new mom who's really into cooking. I love J.Crew. I wear everything J.Crew head to toe. And I really love dogs, right? So like there's things that you would like list that are passions or things that create your identity, and those are the things that you can start really trying to find common denominators to market around. And we're in this very interesting time where there's a little bit of 2 things happening. One is this idea of homogenization because of social media. So this idea of flattening culture, Instagram face, or the farmhouse aesthetic, these things that have like transcended cohorts and have become kind of homogenizing a lot of things happening in culture. At the same time, we're also way more siloed and polarized than we've ever been in a lot of ways. So it's like, which is it? The reality is it's both. And there are things that transcend cohorts and transcend generations. And then there are things that really define specific groups. I often hear, people will tell me, at work, things like, oh my God, this person is taking over Instagram. And it's like, not really. They're taking over your cohort. And then there's a whole other cohort that has no idea what's happening in that world, right? And it's like, I can talk to my nephew who's 8 years old. His frame of the world is so different, right? And when we were 8 years old, we had a more shared view of the world because we all watched the same TV shows. And now these kids can really get into these niches. And so I think as a marketer, you have to do both of those things, right? You have to look for opportunities to transcend cohorts and transcend culture. At the same time, you also have to like really get to know who those archetypes are for your brands and go after them, where they are, who are the influencers that are in those little worlds, where are the events that make up those people's worlds. Maybe one example that came to mind when I was just speaking now is I think the Grammys have become this great global platform recently. They used to be, 10, 20 years ago, it was kind of a legacy platform and kind of boring. And it's been reinvigorated. And now you watch it and these moments like, Tracy Chapman and Luke Combs, that was a moment you watch this and every single person had the same reaction watching that, no matter who you were, age, ethnic background, nothing mattered. That touched people's heart. And that was a moment that transcended cohorts. And those things, to me, when you see those happening, they're typically unexpected blends of something, right? So I think that's this golden age of TV we're in. It's all these shows that have transcended genre, and they're doing like these really outlandish casting choices or creative choices, music that's happening. I think this idea of like the sports world clashing with culture, that's what's transcending people and getting people excited, and introducing someone who may never have been interested in motorsports to this culture of motorsports, right? So I think that's how you think about it.
As a marketer, do you just kind of rely on the consumer to connect with those different audiences, or do you push something in to kind of try and create these? Because I also think that ageless idea where you have various different people connecting with each other on a similar passion point, it's also behind a phone or a computer or whatever. So yes. they also don't know, so it's just a connection of the passion. But as a marketer, how much do you influence them to continue talking and try and kind of leverage that? Because it is part of your brand story, and that's where becoming more of the platform.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you have to know your consumer very, very well, so well, and you have to stay on top of it, because you do it a one-time snapshot, it changes, right? So for example, like I have constant surveying happening. So I'm doing my big, quarterly surveys of like who the customer is, where they are. But I also have every single month, I have snapshots of like, what shows are they watching? And by demographic, and I have, who are they following on Instagram? And those things can change pretty quickly. So it's good to just be on top of it. And I think if you're really good at that, it's so much easier to go with the flow of the customer and adapt to change, because you're just watching where your customer is going. Like, oh, okay, our consumer is like, everyone's watching White Lotus right now. We need to make references to that. Or maybe you don't, you choose not to, but I think just knowing that, you start learning things about your consumer based on those shifts. And I was in a lucky place because I had purview of, J.Crew Factory and Madewell, so I could see the differences too, and like what might pop with Madewell would be sometimes very different than a J.Crew customer. And so that was also fun to just see.
Do you have any fun stories about how like something happened in culture that you guys took advantage of at that moment, whether it was something like the Grammys or something else tuned into?
Yeah, actually, there were so many like TikTok aesthetics last year. I felt like 23 was like the year of TikTok aesthetics, like ballet core, and there were so many. But there was a moment where coastal grandma trended, and suddenly like we've been shooting Diane Keaton forever, and like I'm obsessed with her, and it's like Diane Keaton embodies coastal grandmother, and so like the second that happened, we're like we own that aesthetic. Like there's no other brand that can own that aesthetic like we do. And so just being able to like take the lead on that and talk about it, and it gives you a pop. Like it really did work for us. So, and I think that's half the game, is knowing when to participate and when not to participate. That's important.
What's one thing you wish you could have done, partnership, marketing, that you weren't able to?
Well, I mentioned White Lotus. The two women in White Lotus, the Italian girls. Yeah. Skims, like the second White Lotus, Skims did a little campaign with them, and I was like, I would have loved to work with them, but it was perfect for Skims. So I'm like, I loved those characters, and but yeah, you don't get everything.
Coming back out soon. Soon. Well, so kind of what's next? You see it, you hear everything about AI. You hear, but how do you use that kind of?
Yeah.
How do you feel about it, et cetera?
I mean, AI is the ultimate game changer. Let's be honest. And I think for me, it's kind of two things. One, recognizing this is a huge monumental shift that's going to happen. I think I've heard people who are very smart people talk about this as this is akin to electricity being developed, right? So like this is going to change how we live, how we work, how we interact. It's very important. But at the same time, it's, I think, not thinking of it in an apocalyptic way. It's not going to kill us. It's not going to decimate all of our jobs and turn us into, couch potatoes because we can't do anything else. The reality is it will change a lot of people's jobs. But there's going to be so many new jobs created. It's very similar to the internet. I'm sure a ton of us are in jobs or roles, or we spend a lot of our time doing things that we never would have thought we would have been doing 20 years ago. The same thing's going to happen with AI. And, I think it's important to know AI is about automation, right? So if there's something in your business or your function or your job that can be automated, it will get automated, right? And so that's where the shifts are going to happen. And my understanding is, in the landscape of jobs, it's going to mostly affect things in the middle. So jobs like administrative assistants, legal clerks, that kind of role where there's a lot of automation that's possible in those tasks. That's really where it's going to change. And creative jobs are definitely not going away, especially they might even expand. Low-level jobs are actually typically very complex. So you think about a janitor. A janitor's job is actually very complex for something like a robot. There's very little you can automate. So that kind of job is actually going to be very safe. And then I think the most important thing to think about with AI is that all of the examples of when AI works very well, it's when it's augmenting human work. It's not replacing it, right? So like even the chess example of like the IBM computer beating the best chess player in the world, that can happen. But what they actually found was the best chess player in the world, if he had AI as an augmentation, actually can then outperform and beat the robots, right? So in every case, that's the truth is it's not replacing your job. It should be augmenting your job. Maybe in the short term, my prediction is we're going to see a lot of companies who quietly shrink their workforce or don't fill open roles because of AI. But ultimately, AI will become to be seen as a differentiator, not a cost saver, just like the internet, what happened with the internet. And then you'll start seeing these companies that really, you're going to start hearing all these companies saying, we're AI first. That's going to be all bullshit. But if they are doing that and really thinking of it in an innovative way, they're going to be thinking about it as augmentation and differentiation, not cost savings. But in the short term, we're going to see a lot of like cost savings.
Chat GPT.
100%.
For your status reports.
Yeah.
How much did you guys use it at J.Crew?
Once we actually cataloged all the different functions and what they were doing, there actually was already quite a bit of, machine learning integrated. We were already, using, we were automating scripts for SEO copy. So there were a lot of places we're using it, and I think it's, I'm sure a lot of people already are. Yeah.
We'll open it up for questions. Anyone?
Yeah.
Maybe one.
Yeah.
First, I actually introduced myself as a mermaid because I have like Guinness World Records. But I wanted to ask two questions.
Yeah.
Do you see influencers going more, the trend is going more towards the impactful people, the followers and engagement and marketing? That's a question. And the second one, how much you in your job are looking at cybersecurity when you think about branding and all that?
Two very different questions. I love it. I think for the influencer piece, I think that relates a lot to how I think about archetypes. So I think we're always going to see different levels of influencers and content creators. So you have like your really big macro people, and I put celebrities in that bucket, and they can have a different purpose. And I think in that case, you have to look at it both in terms of their reach and their engagement. We did a campaign with Florence Pugh, who I think at the time she maybe had like 7 or 8 million followers, which seems actually small for her caliber. Her engagement rates are off the charts. So when I actually compared it to some of the celebrities that we were looking at that had 100 or 200 million followers, she actually had higher engagement figures with her followers because she's so loved and authentic in how she approaches social media. So when you're looking even at the macro people, you kind of have to look at both things. There will always be those people who are great at the awareness play, and then you have the mid people that I think are great for maybe other things, product marketing, and then you're always going to have smaller levels that are, in some cases, have hyper engagement at a local level or within a cohort. Like if you want to reach, I don't know, people who are really into cooking in a certain region, I think finding, like, always having a purpose to the partnership that you're looking at. And then the other question on cybersecurity, I mean, I think about it maybe more from just the privacy angle of the consumer. And that has dramatically shifted how we work. Like the cookie going away, we had to get smarter now about how we target people because we can no longer use all these other things. So that's really how I think about it more than cybersecurity. That's probably maybe a little more the CIO function, but I think it's a big topic. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Time? Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, I could talk forever.
The wine glass outside.
Yes. Big meaty topics after rosé. So
thank you, Derek.
thank you guys.